A very warm welcome to you all who have joined us from all over the world for this webinar entitled Faith in Action. We are gathered this afternoon to celebrate the bicentenary of the birth of Cardinal Charles Lavigerie, who was born in the city of Bayonne in southern France in 1825. Lavigerie was a larger-than-life personality who was known for founding two missionary congregations, the Missionaries of Africa, the White Fathers, and the Missionary Sisters of Our Lady of Africa, the White Sisters. But to limit him as a founder of religious congregations would be to ignore the huge importance that he played in the life of the church in the middle of the 19th century. Before his first episcopal appointment as Bishop of Nantes in eastern France, Lavigerie was director of the French charity called Œuvre d'Orient, the work of the Near East, a charity which even until today supports and aids persecuted Christians in the Middle East, particularly in Lebanon and Syria. Lavigerie's journey to Syria was an experience that marked him, and he dedicated his life coming to the aid of all those who were persecuted. Appointed as Bishop of Algiers, Lavigerie worked tirelessly, coming to the help of the local population struck by poverty and disease. But it is his anti-slavery campaign for which he is perhaps best known. Our first speaker, Father Serge Traore, will speak of this in the first presentation. So in remembering Cardinal Charles Lavigerie, we have decided to focus on modern-day slavery, and we are delighted to welcome a panel of experts who will enlighten us in this field. Allow me simply, on behalf of the Missionaries of Africa in Dublin, in Ireland, and on behalf of the Association of Missionaries and Religious in Ireland, to thank you for attending this webinar, and a particular word of thanks to the speakers who have prepared it so diligently. And so, without further ado, I hand you now over to Father Yago Abeledo, who is a Spanish missionary of Africa living in Rome, who will be the moderator of this afternoon's event.
So thanks a lot, Michael. And good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to Faith in Action, Confronting Modern-Day Slavery and Human Trafficking. So, as Michael said, I am Father Yago, and I will be moderating our time together. So we gathered during the bicentenary of Cardinal Charles Lavigerie, founder, collaborator of Pope Leo XIII, and courageous anti-slavery campaigner, to honor his legacy by facing today's forms of exploitation with faith and practical resolve. So our flow for today is simple: a brief housekeeping note. We shall continue with a prayer, then a series of short inputs leading into question and answers, and then a closing synthesis. So thank you again for joining from across Ireland, the UK, and other countries, and also our global MSOLA and MSOLA family. So before we start, a few notes to help us flow well today. We are recording, I think. We're recording, today's webinar. So if you prefer, you can show your image, or you can just keep your camera off. It's up to you to decide. And please stay on mute unless you are invited to speak. For questions and answers, we have only 15 minutes. At the end of every speaker has talk, and I will explain how we will do it when we get there. So please let us keep the chat simple and focused, so we can stay with the speaker and with the content being shared, especially any personal witness. And we will take a very short bio break halfway of the webinar. So now, before we listen to data, to strategies and testimonies, we are going to begin by turning our hearts to prayer, remembering survivors, those still at risk, and all who are on the front lines. So this prayer is our common ground and our compass for the conversation that follows. With that, I invite us into a short time of prayer. So Michael and Toni, over to you.
Everyone see that okay?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Janice, before I begin, might you just give an indication that there is a French translation?
Yeah, so if anyone wants to listen in French, I put the instructions into the chat there. But if you need a little bit more clarification, just let me know now.
Thanks, Janice.
Everyone okay then? Is that sharing okay?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so we begin with a prayer for our Faith in Action webinar, Confronting Modern-Day Slavery and Human Trafficking, with inspiration from Charles Lavigerie and St. Josephine Bakita.
We are grateful to be together today. Let us listen to the Gospel according to St. Luke. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And Jesus rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to say to them, "Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." We are grateful to Jesus Christ. Through his life and his prophetic voice, he calls us to discipleship. Through his Spirit and with his Spirit, he sends us to proclaim liberty to the captives and sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free. We are grateful for Charles Lavigerie, born 200 years ago in 1825 in Bayonne, in France. Jesus Christ, you called him to be your disciple. Profoundly touched and revolted by the suffering of the slaves, the exploitation of men, women, and children in Africa during the 19th century, the Cardinal could not stay indifferent. Filled with compassion, courage, and audacity, he called for action.
On May 24, 1888, Pope Leo XIII entrusted Charles Lavigerie with the mission of organizing the anti-slavery campaign. He committed himself with zeal. He traveled all over Europe to raise awareness among political leaders and the population in Paris, London, Brussels, Naples, Rome, and Milan. He undertook various initiatives, including organizing conferences, significant diplomatic meetings, and setting up anti-slavery committees in many different countries.
We are grateful for Josephine Bakita, born in Sudan around 1869. Jesus Christ, you called her to be your disciple. Personally touched by the suffering of being enslaved in Sudan, Bakita was transformed by your good news. She became your fervent servant, bearing witness to charity and liberation. Begona was taken away from her family and lived the suffering of millions of slaves at that time.
We are grateful for Begona's liberation in 1889. Treated as a domestic servant and as personal property, she refused to return to Sudan with her mistress. Her case was taken to court in Venice. On the 29th of November 1889, the prosecutor declared that Begona was free to choose where to live. His message was clear. The inhumane institution of slavery did not exist in Italy. Any slave setting foot on Italian soil would break free from their chains. She was then 20 years old. Josephine Begona answered the call of Jesus Christ and became a Canossian sister. We are grateful for all the prophetic voices and actions combating all kinds of slavery in today's world.
Let us implore our ancestors in faith and action. May they guide us in our efforts to be with the victims of modern-day slavery today and to work towards a better world for everyone. And so now I invite you all to pray together the prayer of Saint Josephine Begona. You were sold into slavery as a child and endured unspeakable hardship and suffering. Once liberated from your physical enslavement, you found true redemption in your encounter with Christ and his church. O Saint Josephine Begona, assist all those who are entrapped in slavery. Intercede on their behalf with the God of mercy, so that the chains of their captivity will be broken. May God himself free all those who have been threatened, wounded, or mistreated by the trade and trafficking of human beings. Bring comfort to survivors of slavery and teach them to look to Jesus as an example of hope and faith, so that they may find healing from their wounds. We ask you to pray for us and to intercede on behalf of us, that we may not fall into indifference, that we may open our eyes and be able to see the misery and wounds of our many brothers and sisters deprived of their dignity and their freedom, and may we hear their cry for help. Through Jesus Christ our Lord.
Amen.
So thank you, Michael and Toni for this prayer, for grounding us in this moment where we have remembered the witness of Lavigerie and also Begona. So now we turn to the roots of Lavigerie's anti-slavery campaign and why it still speaks today. And our first input is from Father Serge Traore, missionary of Africa, historian and staff member at Tangassa University. And he will be presenting Cardinal Lavigerie, advocate for anti-slavery. So I think we have a video where he's going to give us his speech.
Good afternoon. I see four elements in Cardinal Lavigerie's advocacy for anti-slavery. First, Cardinal Lavigerie revived the anti-slavery movement. The anti-slavery movement started with the resistance of enslaved persons themselves. Over the centuries, actions against slavery were carried out. In the 18th century, an organized anti-slavery movement led to the abolitions of slavery and the slave trade. In 1888, Pope Leo XIII was about to send an encyclical letter to the bishops of Brazil to celebrate the imminent abolition of slavery in their country. Cardinal Lavigerie reminded the Pope that we were not living in the era of abolitionism. It was the era of the horror of enslavement and the slave trade of African people in Africa. Lavigerie shocked the whole world by revealing the horror and cruelty of slavery within the African continent from the testimonies of his missionaries. They were eyewitnesses of the evil of enslavement. Pope Leo XIII included in his encyclical the testimony of Cardinal Lavigerie. He confessed that he was overwhelmed with the greatest bitterness of feeling. Many people were moved by the testimony of Cardinal Lavigerie. Bishop Désiré Joseph of Arras in France said that he was aware of the reality of slavery of Africans, but he was far from suspecting its extent and horrors. He said, "I was still less acquainted with the appalling proportions which the monstrous atrocity of the Negro trade has assumed in Central Africa during the last half a century." Cardinal Lavigerie succeeded in moving the whole world for a new anti-slavery movement. He advocated for a new anti-slavery movement entirely based on the reality of enslavement of Africans within the African continent. Cardinal Lavigerie took the movement to the heart of Africa. He advocated for a fight against slavery where the Africans were captured, enslaved, and sold. He advocated for anti-slavery actions based on the concrete life of enslaved people. It was not about philosophical nor theological ideas about the dignity of the human person. It was about hearing, being moved with compassion, and responding to the cry of the enslaved persons. It was a work of mercy out of compassion. Cardinal Lavigerie advocated for translating into concrete action the various teachings of the Catholic Church against slavery. The Archbishop of Paris said, "It is truly beautiful to see the Church more solemn, devoted to healing humanity from this scourge of slavery through action that is as prudent as it is effective and vigorous." Third, Cardinal Lavigerie advocated for the Catholic Church's responsibility in destroying the enslavement of people. It is a duty, it is a mission, it is a responsibility of the Catholic Church. It is not about abolitionism. It is about the radical destruction of the enslavement of human beings. He put the Catholic Church at the front line of the new international anti-slavery movement. The movement until 1888 was dominated by state persons, activists, and humanists. From 1888, the Catholic Church became the protagonist, the leader. A French politician said in the media that a simple priest over 60 years old could confront as much or more with his words than all the kings with their billions and armies. Through God, I hope he will do it. The Catholic Church was back to the front line as a powerful institution capable of changing the life of people for the better. For that, Cardinal Lavigerie advocated for the redemption of enslaved people as a mission. He clearly believed and wrote that buying slaves was not a solution because it will keep the trade going on. However, the purchase of slaves had a missionary purpose. First, to make the enslaved persons experience the love of Jesus Christ who frees them. Two, to protect them from being re-enslaved. When you ransom enslaved people, it is your responsibility to protect them, to guarantee that they would not be re-enslaved. Third, to empower them through skills useful for the advancement of human society. And four, to offer them to become disciples of Jesus, disciples who had experienced the loving power of God and who would become missionaries to their own African peoples. Four, finally, Cardinal Lavigerie advocated for an action in the heart of Africa. Military actions to destroy the slave trade was happening in the sea. For Lavigerie, it was important to be master of the slave traders' field of action. Cardinal Lavigerie felt challenged by the enslavers. The slave traders succeeded in reaching the African peoples where they were, and they overpowered them. The Catholic missionaries remained at the coast and powerless. Lavigerie took up the challenge. He succeeded in sending his missionaries to the heart of Africa. In the field of action of the slave traders, a missionary action succeeded. The missing action now was a military one. He advocated a state-based military action. He was deceived. The European states did invade the interior of Africa, but for their own interest. Then Cardinal Lavigerie formed the Armed Brothers of the Sahara to destroy slavery inside Africa. The Prince of Wales in 1889, Albert Edward, summarized well Cardinal Lavigerie. He said, His Eminence Cardinal Lavigerie, Archbishop of Algiers and Carthage, when recently in London, engaged in a righteous crusade to be preached by him in all the capitals of Europe. This African prelate, with his own knowledge, during the last 30 years as missionary and as prelate, gave terrible details of the slave trade as the curse of that dark continent. The Cardinal says that the traffic can never be stopped except by force. And if the governments of Europe cannot effect this, he advocates a voluntary crusade of men ready to form armed colonies of blacks to protect the missionaries of religion and civilization, and to defend the slave regions from the murderous raiders who invade them. Let us hope that Cardinal Lavigerie's visit may not be in vain so far as England is concerned. I conclude, let us hope that Cardinal Charles Lavigerie's advocacy for the radical destruction of slavery may not be in vain. Thank you.
So we give thanks to Father Serge for situating Lavigerie's courageous advocacy and his call to concrete action. So keeping that call alive among young people is vital today. So next is Elizabeth Chanyau, Talitha cum Youth Ambassador from Zimbabwe. And she's going to share how youth, churches, and civil society are partnering for prevention and awareness on the ground. So we are welcoming now Elizabeth.
Thanks to you all. My name is Elizabeth Chanyau, a Talitha cum Youth Ambassador in Zimbabwe. We are doing really a lot of work with Sister Diana, who is our national coordinator, as well as our mentor in the work of combating human trafficking. With Sister Diana, we are doing really a lot of work to combat or to end human trafficking in Zimbabwe. For instance, we are doing awareness raising in schools, in churches, as well as in universities. In schools, we are targeting primary schools as well as secondary schools, so that even the little children can be aware of what is human trafficking and how does the traffickers use or which ways do they use to lure people. Again, we are raising awareness in universities, knowing that those who are graduating from universities and even those who haven't graduated can be lured by traffickers in search of opportunities as well as greener pastures. This is due to economic hardships in the country of Zimbabwe. So they are doing really a lot of things so that they can lure these young people as well as young women and girls. Apart from that, we are also doing capacity building workshops. We are partnering with different organizations. For example, International Organization for Migration, Center to Combat Human Trafficking, the Vukahan Trust. We cannot neglect the fact that we are also working in partnership with the government of Zimbabwe, with the Ministry of Public Service, Labor and Social Welfare under the Department of Social Development. This is also done to enhance and also to build the relationships with the government in order to combat human trafficking. Apart from that, we are moving in different churches. For instance, the Methodist Church in Zimbabwe, Rooted in Christ Ministries, AFM in Zimbabwe, Zayoja Forward Faith Ministries. This is done to make sure that even the church leaders of different churches are aware of what is human trafficking and how people are being lured, especially those who are from marginalized communities. This then draws my attention to say, as Talitha Youth Ambassadors, with the help of our national coordinator, Sister Diana Kenney, we are also moving in communities, especially the marginalized communities, which we also call the rural areas. We know that the people from rural areas are easily lured or are easily trafficked due to the fact that there are economic hardships in Zimbabwe, so that they are easily taken advantage of because they will be looking for greener pastures. Taking note of the fact that we understand that human trafficking is not only being taken away from your own mother country to another country, but people can also be trafficked, which we call local trafficking. We do have a lot of people who are taking advantage of young girls who have dropped out from schools, especially the young girls from marginalized communities, so-called rural areas. So they are being taken advantage of, and they later on being abused for labor and also for sexual exploitation. So this is our major concern as Talitha Youth Ambassadors, and also our mentor, Sister Diana Kenney, is also concerned about educating the people from marginalized communities so that they become aware of what is trafficking, so that they become aware of the fact that human trafficking is not only abroad or only international, but it is also an internal thing. We are also educating the teachers from different schools, be it high school, secondary schools, and also primary schools, so that the teacher can disseminate the information to the students so that they can be aware of what is this pandemic all about. We have statistics that human trafficking is a global pandemic, and also the fact that even those people who are highly educated are also at the risk of becoming exploited by traffickers. This is due by the fact that human trafficking is an organized crime, and those who are doing it are highly connected. So we do understand that human trafficking cannot be ended, but we can do a lot of work so that we can reduce it, and also we can protect people falling under the pillar of protection. We are also empowering the survivors of human trafficking in Zimbabwe. For example, there are a lot of initiatives that Sister Diana are taking note of. For instance, starting small projects for survivors of human trafficking. This is done so that they cannot be trafficked again, especially those who have come from countries like Oman and Kuwait. So with this, we totally understand And we are agreeing as Talitha Youth Ambassadors and our national coordinator, as well as those who are helping us in combating human trafficking, to an extent that we know that we are the protagonist of change, and together we can make it, but divided we fall. So we are here claiming that human trafficking can be reduced, especially in Zimbabwe and in the world wide. So we are really passionate about ending human trafficking, and we are going to keep our flag high, and we are going to work tirelessly so that this pandemic can be reduced and ended, especially in Zimbabwe, where marginalized communities are taken advantage of. With this, I salute and I thank you.
So thanks a lot. Elizabeth, that is talking with us all the way from Zimbabwe. I think he's present with us. So thank Elizabeth, and for that energizing youth perspective and the partnership you have built. And now from Zimbabwe, we move to Spain, where church and civil society respond to a vast yet often hidden reality. So Sister Begona Inarra, that is our next speaker, she's a missionary sister of Our Lady of Africa with decades across Africa, founded AMESEA's Justice and Peace Office in Kenya, and later served as Executive Secretary of the African Youth Europe Faith Justice Network in Brussels, advocating before the European Union. She has coordinated her congregation's Justice and Peace Integrity of Creation and Encounter and Dialogue Network, and since 2012, work in Europe with trafficking survivors, first in Paris with Nigerian women, and now in Madrid as a shelter volunteer and coordinator of the Archdiocesan Anti-Trafficking Commission. So her lifelong focus is dignity, justice, and the defense of women. So we welcome Sister Begona.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to share on a reality very close to my heart, human trafficking, and now in Spain because it's where I am now. Spain, the reality of human trafficking in Spain. Spain is both a destination and transit country for human trafficking. Much of its hidden occurring in private flats, rural areas, and increasingly online, making it difficult to measure precisely. Yet, available evidence reveals a vast and alarming reality. From sexual exploitation alone, Spain's Interior Ministry estimates profits of around 5 million euros every day, nearly 2 billion euros annually. This makes trafficking for prostitution one of the most lucrative criminal markets in the country. Labor trafficking is even harder to measure, but likely generates even greater profits. Migrants working in agriculture, construction, catering, hotels, and domestic service are particularly vulnerable, often enduring conditions that cross into forced labor and trafficking. This hidden slavery of labor trafficking is closer than many think. It is in the greenhouses of Almería, the strawberry fields of Huelva, construction sites, restaurants, hotels, and even private homes. Spain also has one of the biggest prostitution markets in Europe. Many say that it's the first country in prostitution of Europe and the third in the world. The demand fuels sexual exploitation, which now takes place hardly on the streets and more in hidden apartments, houses, escort networks, and online platforms. NGOs estimate that the majority of women in prostitution in Spain are trafficked or exploited. Victims come primarily from Latin America, Colombia, Venezuela, Eastern Europe, Romania, Maghreb, Morocco, and West Africa, Mali, Senegal, Cameroon. Many are lured by false job offers, trapped by debt, or threatened with harm to their families. They are found everywhere, but mainly in cities big as Barcelona, Madrid, and Valencia for sexual exploitation, or in rural provinces for agricultural labor. Other forms of trafficking is begging, forced marriages, or forced to criminality. Also exist, though they are harder to detect. The response in Spain. The Spanish government has specialized police units to fight trafficking. In 2004 alone, and 2024, alone, in 400 operations, they freed almost 1,800 victims, arrested nearly 1,000 people, and dismantled more than 100 criminal networks. A new comprehensive anti-trafficking law is being prepared. It will expand victims' rights, establish a national rapporteur, and create a referral mechanism to ensure faster identification and support for presumed victims. It's on the parliament, but it takes time. Spain hosts a large number of NGOs all over the country dedicated to combating trafficking. They welcome the victims around hotlines, safe houses, legal and psychological services, and training programs. Since 2004, the Spanish Network Against Trafficking, RECT, brings together 25 organizations to coordinate advocacy and joint action at national level, while other networks do it at regional level. They are also members of the European organizations and networks like the EU Civil Society Platform Against Trafficking in Human Beings, Renate, Talitha, and others. Still, challenges remain. In Spain, only the police can formally recognize victims of trafficking. Without that recognition, individuals, victims, cannot access many rights of protection. This means that many men and women, supported by NGOs and church organizations, remain invisible in the official statistics, creating a significant gap between government numbers and grassroots reality. But collaboration with the police is strengthening. At Madrid and Barcelona airports, Christian and lay organizations work alongside the police to help identify potential victims as they arrive. This spirit of cooperation between church, NGOs, and police is a distinctive strength in Spain. The role of the church and Christian organizations. Amid these challenges, the church plays a decisive role. Direct assistance. Many religious congregations, Caritas, and diocesan services manage shelters, emergency floods, and reintegration programs in over 50 towns. Victims have housing with their needs covered, medical and psychological care, legal advice, training, and above all, personal accompaniment in their passing from victim to survivors. Congregations dedicated to this mission. Communities like the Adorer Sisters, Oblate Sisters, Villa Teresita, and the Franciscans of the White Cross are mainly for their charism is centered in trafficking. Along with many other women and few men religious and lay people work daily on their front line with victims of human trafficking, do advocacy for better conditions, and create awareness on society on this reality. Coordination and advocacy. The Spanish Bishops' Conference has an office dedicated to human trafficking, led by a lay woman, since already nearly 10 years. It organizes diocesan commissions, provides training, publishes prayer and awareness materials, and organizes national events as St. Vaquitas Days and the European Day Against Trafficking. Many dioceses have anti-trafficking commissions. Pastoral and spiritual accompaniment. Beyond material help, Christian organizations work with victims in their healing journey, affirming their dignity and reminding them they are loved by God and the community. Awareness raising. All groups working on human trafficking in Spain have as priority to make known the reality of human trafficking as a means of prevention. Advocacy. 4 church organizations participate in the REC national network I mentioned before, and more in the regional ones. They play a vital advocacy role, both collectively and individually, actively engaging in government bodies, police, law enforcement, and various levels of administration to improve anti-trafficking legislation, propose legal reforms, and foster stronger, more effective institutional collaborations. This Jubilee year 2025, the Spanish Bishops' Conference has chosen human trafficking as the Church's social priority. Across Spain, parishes, schools, and dioceses are being mobilized to raise awareness, to pray, and to act. For example, Madrid's Cathedral now displays banners and information for pilgrims and tourists, reminding them that trafficking is happening here and now. Spain's distinctive features. Spain's situation in trafficking has some unique features. The vast scale of prostitution driving sexual exploitation. 2, the hidden nature of trafficking, increasingly shifting from brothels and streets to private flats and houses and online platforms especially. 3, systemic vulnerability of migrant labor, especially in agriculture and construction works. 4, a large and diverse network of NGOs and church organizations, making Spain one of Europe's strongest countries for victim support. 5, active police operations, but gaps in victim identification and long-term support. A church that combines humanitarian aid, spiritual care, education, and advocacy with a special emphasis during this Jubilee year. A call from Christ and from Lavigerie. We have had a short view of the reality of human trafficking in Spain. As Christians, we know that behind the data lies a face. A Venezuelan woman forced into prostitution, a Senegalese man exploited in agriculture, a Romanian child forced to beg, a Pakistani girl married without consent, an Albanian youth forced to commit crimes. Many more remain unseen. Christ, who gave his life for the smallest ones, and Lavigerie, who courageously confronted slavery, call us today as Christians and missionaries of Africa and MSOLA to face human trafficking, the slavery of our time. We are sent to see the faces of our sisters and brothers who suffer, who have lost their rights, to raise awareness and break the silence in parishes, schools, and communities, and to be a bridge for the vulnerable through hospitality, accompaniment, and advocacy. Each trafficked person is a beloved child of God. With compassion, prophetic courage, and gospel hope, Christ and Lavigerie call us to keep Christ's love and Lavigerie's fire alive until every person is free. Thank you for listening.
So thanks, Sister Begona, for your witness, for revealing both the scale and the hope of Spain's response. So to widen the lens, we can ask ourselves, what does the global picture show, especially across Africa? And now we are welcoming Kevin Hyland, and he's UK's first independent anti-slavery commissioner, former head of London's human trafficking unit with a 30-year career tackling serious organized crime, founding member and now global strategic director of the Santa Marta Group. He advises governments, business, and NGOs worldwide on anti-trafficking law, strategy, and training. He was awarded the Order of the British Empire in 2014 for his work against trafficking. So we welcome Kevin.
Thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to be with everybody here today, many of whom I know and have worked with over the years. But of course, when we're talking about human trafficking and modern slavery, the word pleasure doesn't really align with it whatsoever. But I think really when we're looking at the issue of human trafficking, I was listening very carefully to the presentation of the Cardinal 200 years ago and his vision on this issue. And the way that he was talking about this issue really in many ways hasn't changed. It affects various parts of the world. It feeds off vulnerability and poverty. And as Pope Francis said on Anti-Slavery Day in 2017, or European UN Anti-Slavery Day, that until we have the resources that can deal with the challenge, we're always going to be losing the fight. And I'm afraid that's the biggest problem that we have at the moment. And I'm just going to use some materials here now just to discuss the issue with some facts and figures, just to show perhaps where we need to start to think about where we need to focus our global efforts. Only a few weeks ago, I was in Nigeria, and one of the challenges there was the way that in Nigeria, from when I was there previously, and this was my 6th visit to Nigeria, the way that the crime has developed, and developed in a way that really the international response has remained passive. And of course, we see the tireless efforts of the Catholic Church. And I think that if there was an evaluation of which country was doing the most or which organization, without a shadow of a doubt, whether it's financial terms, whether it's effort terms, whether it's impact terms, the Catholic Church would leave most countries and most global efforts behind. But if we look back on history, we have got many things which go back some years in the fighting against human trafficking and modern slavery. Things, for example, the Slavery Convention of 1926 and the Forced Labour Convention of 1930. In the first protocols of those conventions, it says that these should be delivered in the quickest possible time. I don't think almost 100 years is the quickest possible time. And many of the measures are still waiting to be implemented. And that's why the Labour Convention of 2014 was brought in to actually make sure that the measures in the 1930 convention became a reality. Things like the rights of workers, things like sanctions against companies and businesses, things like no recruitment fees. They're all within the laws, which many countries, in fact, most countries have signed up to, but they're not being delivered. And if we look, the ILO, the International Labour Organization, has got 161 protocols or conventions, and there are 180 countries now with domestic legislation outlawing human trafficking and modern slavery. Very different situation to the 18th and 19th and early 20th century, where there was very little legislation. Even in the UK, for example, when we think about the times of William Wilberforce as a political leader ending slavery, there wasn't a crime of forced labour in the UK until 2010, forced labour in its own specific legislation. And of course, that's all been updated with the 2015 Modern Slavery Act. But with all that legislation, with all that material, let's look at the real figures and the facts. If we look in 2024, and this is data which comes out of the United States TIP report, which is data that is provided by governments around the world. And in 2024, there were 102,000 victims identified, 31,000 less than in 2023, and less than 2022. And actually, if you look, other than some years, it's been the lowest figure. And that replicates less than 0.2% of victims in the world, the 50 million, which is the estimate. So who is the voice of the 99.8% of victims? The silent victims, the ones who are there in those situations. And of course, much of this happens in Africa, Southeast Asia, but in Europe as well, and in the United States. In fact, it happens everywhere. But when we look at some of the worst forms of slavery, where lives are lost, that would very much be unique to some industries in Africa and in Southeast Asia and in India and Southern Asia. And that would be children in particular. And every year, 22,000 children die, the ones that are known of, in modern slavery and human trafficking situations. Who speaks for them? And if you equate that to aircraft, If you think about the 2 aircraft that crashed, shockingly losing about 250 lives, 2 Boeing 737s, the whole fleet was grounded because of the risk. The CEO of Boeing lost his job, criminal investigation, billions and billions in compensation, investigation ongoing now. It costs people money. It costs companies money. 22,000 children dying is about 110 Boeing 737s crashing a year. But nothing ever happens. No company's held to account. No government looks at it. No figures are produced about it. It happens silently. And unfortunately, we're all sat on computers now. We're all sat with phones, and we need those. Of course we need those. But they will be strongly connected to the industries at most risk. Shiny paint in cars, cosmetics. Those are the industries. Anything where there's extraction from the ground is where the highest risk is. And of course, because of the wealth and the riches in Africa, that is where the most activity happens. So those figures show that there is quite a lot to do. And if we look at convictions at 7,900 out of 15,000, we are seeing increase in convictions, albeit there's no increase from 2018, and there's a reduction on 2019, but it's staying low. So actually, the chances of getting caught for this crime across the world are almost negligible. So it's a crime worth doing. And why is it done? Because a conservative estimate is that it creates 236 billion in criminal profit every year. So those who are doing these crimes are making a lot of money, and they range from individuals. Here in Ireland, we've had some convictions recently of trafficking cases where they were making hundreds and hundreds of thousands of euros, hundreds of thousands of euros. In the United States, they've dealt with cases where they've been making millions. In the UK, there was companies that have been making millions connected to some of the supermarkets on the high street, and that includes trafficking in the UK itself. So we need to start to better understand the economics of this crime, and how do we address those economics? What is available to us to make this a crime that doesn't pay? Because the true cost of human trafficking and that money is it destroys lives. It wipes out good actions. Global development budgets are about 236 billion a year. They've gone down now, particularly with the change of stance in the US. But actually, dollar for dollar, trafficking wipes out every dollar that is put into the good world. Remittances are stolen. Most remittances in the world, 66%, 660 billion, are low and middle income countries. People who travel and want to send money back home are having it stolen, are being charged extortionate fees, particularly in Southeast Asia, particularly money going through the Philippines. If you actually think Ireland was built on remittances, and look at the booming economy in Ireland now, and yet it was built on remittances. People like my parents and my grandparents traveling for work, albeit they all returned home. Development becomes impossible if we have human trafficking. It is impossible to develop nations whilst there is trafficking, because trafficking means there's corruption, corruption means there's money laundering, and therefore there's no stability in a country. And what has happened over the years is this crime has become a business model, an absolute business model. As we heard from Sister before us, the business model in Spain is a very wealthy model, mainly attracting women from promises from Africa coming and ending up being exploited in a well-developed nation. Just to give you a view of the UK's national referral mechanism, which is the government-funded project, in 2024, there were 19,125 referrals. Most common exploitation was labour exploitation, with 6,000 referrals. The biggest nationality of trafficked people were British. The age demographic for children, 31% were children, and the gender, 74 of the referrals were males. So this actually changes some of the dynamics that we assume, but it matters not. And we sometimes get too into the detail because where is trafficking okay? I would say nowhere. So we need standardization. We need standardization within business, within governments, within our processes. And at the moment, I'm involved with the G20, and we are developing a model where we're going to show how much countries give towards fighting human trafficking, the G20 countries. And I'm going to be able to show later this year that it's probably way under $1 billion US. So therefore, the criminals earning 236 billion are wiping everything out that's put in. But also there's other elements to trafficking. The new crime, we know that online crime, particularly from the Philippines, of children doing live acts, and that could be in Dublin, it could be in London, it could be in Paris. Sexual acts, something that Cardinal Tagle has spoken about for a number of years. We also have this new crime of frauds, whereby people are trafficked in Africa. Nigeria is now a hub for it. Recently, it was in Ghana, where people are held against their will, taken into these centres to do frauds. And those frauds are done in the United States, the UK, and places like Ireland, English-speaking nations normally. But actually, the country that's been hit the most pro rata is the United Kingdom. The country that's lost the most money out of it is the United States, losing 800 million last year. And that's people's pensions, that's people's savings. So trafficking has two victims sometimes. The victim who is created in the country, and then a victim who's created in a far distant shore, particularly a pensioner or somebody who's retired. And in the UK, in the last couple of years, a police sergeant who retired, he invested his savings on something like this through one of these scams, and he lost everything and he took his own life. That is the impact trafficking has over there to our own nations. And of course, if we look at business, our National Health Service in the UK was buying gloves to be used in theatres to save lives from forced labour in Malaysia. If we look, the BBC investigated Shein and found that workers were exploited in China. This is a growing company. In Ireland, major retailers linked to the forced labour and cotton industry in China. That included Dunnes, Penneys, Tesco's, the biggest brands, the biggest names. And of course, Penneys found that particularly shocking, as they do invest to religious sisters and have taken immediate steps to negate that challenge. And of course, we see it in sports and in the construction system. And here, as I say, when I was in Nigeria only 3 weeks ago, there were 231 Nigerians rescued from Ghana who were exploited and trafficked there to be in one of these centres for doing the fraud. So we need to look more at prevention to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the campaigns that I'm leading is getting traction from the United States and from other G20 countries, is us raising 30 billion every year by 2030 to fight human trafficking. That is a small amount compared to, say, the fight against drugs or the fight against terrorism. But trafficking actually creates as much revenue as those crimes. In fact, now looking at it in the global context, it may be creating more. It destabilizes security. It destabilizes trade. But ultimately, there is an individual, a person who suffers. So 30 billion by 2030 every year by G20 countries is a small ask. And the presentation that I heard earlier about the Cardinal who went to the world and said, this is what we need. We need to fight back on this. I think we're in that position now, and we should listen to his words and his model and that of Pope Francis when he said we need the resources. There is so much wonderful work being done by the Catholic Church. I've been privileged to see religious sisters, whether it's in Ireland, the UK, across Europe, in Africa, Southeast Asia, or Latin America. I've seen the work that they are doing in particular, but we need to give them the helping hand. And so I think that making this so that we can try to achieve 8.7 or start to achieve it and start that program by 2030, I really want to push that we have the 30 billion every year from then on, and we need to increase that thereafter. So thank you very much for your time today. And I really appreciate the work that AMRI and APT and all the others across the world are doing. And it's been a real pleasure in something that shouldn't be a pleasure to be part of. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kevin, for that clear global overview and the challenge to act locally through concrete partnerships and survivor-centered practice, and also for appreciating and valuing the work of the Catholic Church. So welcome again, and thank you again, Kevin, for the clear global overview and the challenge to act locally. Building alliance is key, something that the Church is learning to do more intentionally. And now we welcome Bishop William Kenney, a Passionist and Auxiliary Bishop Emeritus of Birmingham. He was twice elected President of Caritas Europe and served 3 terms on Caritas Internationalis Legal Affairs Commission. And he is a member of the Las Casas Advisory Board, which promotes critical reflection on questions of human dignity in the light of Catholic social teaching and theology. So welcome, Bishop William. We listen to you attentively.
Thank you very much indeed, and many thanks for your very kind invitation to take part in this webinar. Some of what I prepared is a repetition of what others have already said, so I will have to ask apologies from the translator as I change some of the text as I go through it. The Church has addressed slavery from the very beginning. You only need to read the New Testament to find out about that. And don't get worried, I'm not going to tell the history of slavery through the Church. But the Church, by and large, has been rather uncomfortable with that situation, though not always completely. I have never forgotten the story I was told by the Sacred Heart Sisters when they first arrived in America. The gift that the local bishop gave to them was a slave. And the reason, of course, that the Church has had this problem, or not problem, but has been so concerned, is because of the dignity of every human being. Every single woman and man is made in the image and likeness of Almighty God. I would say that in the moment in the world, there are 2 ways in which the Church approaches this activity, this phenomenon. The most obvious one, and we heard about this both from Madrid and from Kevin, is that it is the help that is given to those who are being recruited, those who are slaves, and those who have been freed. Religious and many others, having many different orders and congregations, have taken part in this work. And the role, if I may repeat what has been said, but the role of women religious in this work can hardly be exaggerated. Slavery, as also has been said, is found in many different forms: in domestic service, agriculture, fishing, construction, service industries, sexual services, and organ harvesting. A parenthesis there, that is something people don't think about. And yet people from our countries, I talk about Europe particularly, go abroad to get operations because it's cheaper and they don't have to wait in a queue. Before taking a transplant in Thailand or in Southeast Asia, please ask where the organ came from. Unfortunately, the number of people enslaved, as Kevin has already said, is just increasing. But we need to remember, therefore, that every single woman and man or child we save from slavery is someone made in the image and likeness of Almighty God. It's well worth doing, even if we are tending to lose the battle. The second area, which is possibly less well known, is that of policy and creating alliances between various bodies who are actors in combating this crime. I am a member of the board of the Santa Marta Group, and this group was founded by Pope Francis in 2014 to bring together churches, police, judicial, and social authorities to cooperate. Its guiding principle is to bring together decision makers and leaders from the church, law enforcement agencies, and civil society to create partnerships based on trust to eradicate modern slavery, much again as Kevin has said. Sancta Marta tries to identify the right leaders, build trust between these decision makers, and engage in cooperation to share good practice. In other words, Sancta Marta tries to act as a catalyst. This requires time and dedicated effort, but we have seen that it can be transformational. And also people are willing to listen to us. If I just limit myself to the area I've worked most in at this level in Europe, I have, in the last 3 years, been in Iceland, Helsinki, Berlin, Dusseldorf, Bonn, Brussels. I'm in Brussels at least twice a year, sometimes more frequently, in Strasbourg, Copenhagen, London, Ireland, in Paris. The list is endless. I spend far too much of my time sitting on aeroplanes, which are not particularly ecologically friendly, but I still have not found another way of getting there. The situation is such that in those situations we find ourselves talking to the heads of police, to the presidents of countries, to various bodies, and this is without any great effort. In other words, the willingness is there. The problem is, again, as Kevin has already said, the lack of the application of the laws which are there and the interest of the people to do something about it. I can't list the achievements of Santa Marta. They're considerable. But we have chosen, that, as I have said, that we can often gain access at the highest level in our society thanks to the active involvement of the Holy Father and the Holy See. For example, one of those tools, which I'd like to hope most of you have been in contact with, I suspect, however, not, and that is papal nuncios. Remember, they are ambassadors. They have contact at high level with other countries. And they have proved, I would stand for this, in many cases, invaluable in forwarding the fight against this crime. They are allies to much of the work that I do. I have very little time, so let's move on to what would I be looking from you, anybody, but in Europe particularly, to be doing. And let me give you just 3 things. The first seems rather obvious, but it's to be aware. Know what is happening locally. Your local may not be my local, but it will be something you have contact with. That doesn't matter whether you're working in a small village in the Alps or whether you are the cardinal in a major city. The situation, the job is still to be the same. Make sure that whatever level you are working, that you know your police, your judicial authorities, your civil society, and that is in your town or village. I live in a little town called Woodstock, which has a town council, which is as amusing, entertaining, as important as most very small town councils are in the United Kingdom. Know who sits there, know what they are doing. Are they looking for people who are being trafficked? You've already been told all about this. Know where the poor and the vulnerable are looking for relief. Do you ever visit your food bank? And again, I don't care at what level you work. I can honestly say, yes, I do. Because there you will find possibly some of the people who are being trafficked. If you know where they are being trafficked to or from, get in touch with the church in that country. Any international religious body can do this. It's there already. It's just a matter of, again, being aware. And you can do this through your own congregation, through church authorities, but any sort of organization within where you are working. My second point was to employ, and many of you will be employing people, and purchase. We all buy things ethically. Just to take one small example of what can be done. One bishop in this country, in the United Kingdom, well, England and Wales, not the United Kingdom, said to his priest, of course, you have to go out and buy clothes. It's getting to winter. Some of you will go out and buy a jumper. If that jumper, if you see something that looks good and is cheap, fine. But before you buy it, ask, why is it cheap? There may be a good reason, no problem. If the good reason is there, buy it. But it might also be that it has been produced in Bangladesh, in India, in Vietnam by slave labor. But it is on sale here in Europe. That bishop has achieved that many of his priests are making a nuisance of themselves in various shops in the town by asking, where do these things come from? A most useful exercise. What we need to do at a bigger level is to find where we can, in the supply chains, stop slavery. One country which has been very good at this is Australia, introducing into contracts the fact that if slavery is discovered, the contract becomes void. Can you do that in your country with some firm which is with you? I've already said that we need to have partnerships with NGOs, authorities, and civil society in general. Don't always be looking for them in the church. The other big interest of my life has been armaments. One of my major cooperators in that, work I do for our Bishops' Conference, is a purely secular group called SCRAP, which is looking for the scrapping of all weapons. They have been extremely useful. And may I finish on a point, and this is not just the pious ending, because I'm a bishop and I'm expected to be pious in some way or another. But what I would like to encourage is that the feast of St. Josephine Bakhita on the 7th of February becomes a way of engaging people across the world, and not least in Europe. I was asked the other day by an 85-year-old woman, yeah, I'm all in agreement with you, but what can I do about modern slavery? Pray, which she does most definitely. And we need to get that feast is celebrated across our countries, across the world. Why? Because prayer in itself is important, but also it raises awareness. And I come back, therefore, to where I began. Be aware. Spread knowledge of St. Josephine and modern slavery. Some of that will not directly solve the problem of modern slavery, but it helps those entrapped in it to have hope. If they have managed to go to church on that feast day and know that the world is praying for them, their hope will be just a little greater. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you, Bishop William, for those concrete pathways. Santa Marta's builds diocesan pathways to cooperate with the law enforcement, with safeguard survivors and prevent exploitations. And also your invitation to all of us to be aware, to be proactive at local level, and to network with NGOs, with civil society, and also to spread knowledge, the knowledge of St. Joseph. So now, to close the inputs, we shift to Ireland for a country-level view, and we welcome Brian O'Toole. And Brian O'Toole works with the Presentation Sisters at the Interprovincial Justice Desk in Dublin. Integral to his work is the commitment to collaborate with other NGOs and others, where our commitments and interests align. So Brian is a member of ACT to Prevent Trafficking in Ireland, a steering team, and represents them as the Renate Country Board representative for Ireland. So we welcome Brian.
Thank you indeed, Yago. And I'm very privileged to be here amongst some very esteemed company. And the webinar so far has been very, very interesting, even for those who have heard some of this detail before. I have to say too, a bit like the Bishop William before me, some of what I was about to say has been said before. So I'm going to skip through the parts that have been said before, because to repeat it is just to draw it out a little bit. But there are three things I would like to bring up today as the last speaker. And the first really is I want to talk a little bit about APT, Act to Prevent Trafficking in Ireland. It is a network of congregations who work to raise awareness. If you take the last message, one of the very last words that Bishop Kenney said was, be aware. And I'm beginning with the exact same phrase, be aware. And it is APT, Act to Prevent Trafficking in Ireland. It is their main focus to create a greater degree of awareness in every possible area that they can around the issue of human trafficking and modern slavery in Ireland first and elsewhere all around the world. So that's the first thing I want to mention is APT, Act to Prevent Trafficking as a network. Then I would also like to speak a little bit about Renate, which is also a network, but this is at a European level, and how APT feeds into Renate and how as networks of religious we have a particular way of doing work. We have what we call this faith in action, which speaks to the title of this particular webinar, as we do our very best to reach the furthest behind the principle that underpins the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, that Kevin mentioned earlier this afternoon. And the last thing I'd like to do is, as I kind of explain a little bit more about APT, and a little bit more about Renate, I will try and tell the story of Ireland with respect to human trafficking and how Ireland is impacted by human trafficking. Begona mentioned earlier how Spain is a country of origin, transit and destination. However, Ireland is more a country of destination, which doesn't mean that we are not countries of origin or indeed transit, but primarily Ireland is a country of destination. In this particular year of Jubilee of Hope, which I think is really what we're trying to get to the heart of at the end of this webinar, and I'm conscious too of being the last person to speak, and I'm conscious too also that in all our parishes in Ireland, we are about building hope, and part of what APT and Renate try to do is to be that hope as we try to reach the furthest behind first. You will not remember everything I say. I know you won't believe that, but you just won't remember everything I say. And I'm really sorry to all the speakers, but I actually don't remember everything you said. But if you can just pick up on one or two things that I say and what others have said, and you walk away from this webinar with one or two things from each of the inputs, then that, from our point of view, or from my point of view anyway, is a good day's work done, and you will get the recording. I'd like to just mention APT first of all. APT is 20 years of age this year. Act to Prevent Trafficking in Ireland. And the type of work that we have done is we have up to 30 congregations meeting monthly and in between times to try and create programs whereby schools, parishes and communities can become aware. And Kevin and others indeed over the years have contributed to these programs in order to create a greater degree of awareness around the issue of human trafficking, to bring to life some of the messages and call to actions that both Kevin and Bishop William have called for already in this particular webinar. So APT is also a group that are not afraid to meet any group, any place, anywhere, whether, as I said, it's a parish or a school or a community, or maybe it's with the Gardaí who are charged with the statutory care of victims of human trafficking and prosecution of those who are involved. They will also advocate for changes in the law in order to make sure that those who are furthest behind definitely have that voice that can be missing. So APT continue to work. And APT are one network, an All-Ireland network, that feed into Renate, which is a European network. The photographs that I've used are photographs that a friend of mine took. and all of them are of a sunrise. I decided I wasn't using any more of these dark images that we've typically used on this, like, for example, the one in the poster there. I decided I would use this hopeful image of a dawn. The poster on the right is just one aspect of APT's work. And APT is part of AMRI, and AMRI with Toni, Pyke and others are running this webinar this evening, are part of this webinar. But this particular poster is one that we have used to try and put in chemist shops, in hospitals, in clinical settings, in physiotherapists' offices. Anywhere we can put it, we'll put it. And the reason being that we have learned that in their first year of being enslaved, or a captivity, shall we say, victims of human trafficking very often need to approach some healthcare setting because of a healthcare need. So we thought, well, what better place to put a poster to raise awareness, to alert a victim to the possibility that perhaps they are victims of human trafficking because maybe they do not even know. Ireland, as I said earlier, is a country of destination, but we don't have a great record, as Kevin mentioned, in terms of the numbers of arrests or the numbers of convictions. We have very, very few, in fact, and this has been referred to by the TIP report that Kevin referred to earlier, and has just been published recently. With regards to children, we don't actually record victims as such, as victims of human trafficking. So when the figures are read, it looks like Ireland doesn't have any victims of human trafficking, and we know that's not the case. Kevin already said, who is the voice of the 98%? Because we know that in the numbers that are found, and the numbers that are discovered or identified, that they're only a fraction of the numbers. I remember sitting somewhere else or listening to Kevin elsewhere, because Kevin now lives in Ireland. He said, there is no town in Ireland, big or small, where you cannot say, or you can say for sure, that there is no human trafficking or modern slavery in this town. The truth is, it is absolutely everywhere. Some of the work that Ireland does, APT in Ireland, doesn't work alone. We work with others. Some are NGOs, some are state-funded. Ruhama, for example, is an Irish NGO, and they report a rise in all of those impacted by sexual exploitation. They have dealt with 155 victims of human trafficking, and a huge increase in the number of users of their service, but these wouldn't be reflected in the Gardaí numbers, because Ireland has a new national referral mechanism, a new way of helping to identify victims of human trafficking, but it hasn't been implemented in the way that it should in order to reach those furthest behind easily, or as good as it can be. So there is a delay, and this is a criticism that many are levying, including the TIP report, at Ireland at the minute. Ireland pursues the Nordic model, which means that we don't criminalise the person who is involved in sex work. We criminalise the purchaser. However, if you were to ask anybody in Ruhama, and I'm thinking of Mia de Fuita and others in particular, they would say, please, 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 can you apply an on-the-spot fine for the purchase of sexual services? Because of the fact that once you do that, they're Googleable. And once they're Googleable, they're ashamed. But at the minute, it's not done. So it means that even though we pursue the Nordic model, which is a good model to pursue, we stop short of fulfilling exactly all that we asked it and meant for it to do. Though in election manifestos, APT and others have asked prospective TDs and MPs in our parliament, we've asked them, please make this happen. And that's just one of the things that APT will do, is advocating for change. We're also looking at labour exploitation. The TIP report would say that Ireland doesn't have any, but the Gardaí do work hard, and they do chase assets, and they look at labour law, and those who have been under the labour laws in Ireland, they can identify and they can work to ensure that others are not enslaved. They can also change, and we have changed the legislation, meaning that those who are employed are no longer tied to employers in the way that they were. There isn't, if you like, as much labour inspection as there used to be. This is just a snapshot of the Ruhama National Report in 2024, published last Thursday. But they have reported 35% increase in human trafficking. And Kevin spoke about Africa earlier, and I'm just going through this quickly, but I noticed too that Nigeria is the greatest number of victims of human trafficking that were dealt with by Ruhama. And these are just the figures that they have dealt with all around the world. But if you notice that from Zimbabwe, there were 18, South Africa, there were 14, Nigeria, there were 131. So Africa is a real source country from Ireland's point of view in terms of the victims of human trafficking. As I said, we don't work alone. don't. We work with Blue Blindfold, who are the state's awareness and information portal managed by the Guards and the Irish Police and the Department of Justice. They are a proactive organisation, or a proactive group within the Gardaí. They are a small group, and they too would hope that things would move along, perhaps a little bit more than their bosses might hope for. We do, as I said, need a national referral mechanism that is up to date, and Greta and the TIP report would also speak to this. Others who were involved alongside APT might be groups like the Cork Against Human Trafficking, another network. The HSE Estate, which is the Health Service Executive, MethPaths, who do awareness training specifically to try and make sure that children are cared for and that others who are at the coalface do get all of this training, knowing the signs. The Migrants' Rights Centre in Ireland does huge work with those who are working in Ireland, but perhaps being employed or exploited in various ways. And then the Irish Human Rights Equality Commission have a national rapporteur, which is great. It's almost like an ombudsman who calls them to order when they say, "Oh, hang on, that's not right, and this is not right," which is super from our point of view. Bishop Wiltshire mentioned this. Unethically sourced goods. As did Kevin, he spoke of pennies and duns. Kevin also mentioned the local impact, thinking locally to have a global impact. There are new rules coming in now around corporate sustainability and due diligence. A big long name saying that big companies have to be a little bit more mindful of their human rights responsibilities up and down their supply chain in order to make sure that humans trafficking and modern slavery does not happen as part of that work. Business guidance is also happening. There is, of course, a criticism of the fact that we don't have good accommodation for victims of human trafficking, that we don't have enough training for judges and those involved, that we have never actually awarded compensation for victims of human trafficking, something Renata have pointed out, that our laws are not as strong and as robust as they should be. We do not identify as many as we could, and employment and that is not. So we are weak, although we are in tier 2, which means that we are trying, but perhaps not trying hard. So there are gaps and challenges, and I've mentioned some of those earlier on. Safe reporting is about being able to report in such a way that the person feels that they can be safely do so, and that's not always the case. So who are Renata then? The other religious network. Well, Renata are religious in Europe, networking against trafficking and exploitation. They are value-driven, faith-based. They have a reach across the countries. Cross-border, they're involved in survivor-centred support, in advocacy awareness at the EU, which is the Council of Europe, and at the UN level. And they're also involved in training and capacity building across countries and in country, depending on where it is they work. Some of the success stories with regards to Renata might be the ability, for example, of one person as a member of Renata to make contact with another to be sure that the person travelling has had safe passage, that they haven't fallen into the hands, or that a particular advertisement is indeed kosher and that it is safe for somebody to travel. So these kind of collaborations are kind of happening all the time and beneath the net and kind of beneath view. They're hidden from view, but they're all extremely important. Renata, if you like, depends on collaboration. It's all about putting your best foot forward together, not on your own. We're recognizing that very little can be done by one person, one group, that it depends on everybody pulling together, that there is a huge volunteer commitment within Renata, in the sense that there is very little funding. And that is something that is apparent in a lot of the NGOs. They are scraping for funding. And in the context of reduced aid, not just US aid, but EU aid, where aid for the other, aid for a human rights-based organisation is diminishing because overseas development aid, which is a target of the Sustainable Development Goals that Kevin mentioned earlier, is being reduced. But it's also a case too that it's being diverted into things like defence and so on. They are also an ethical voice, and they're a catalyst for change. So in summary, the advantages, there is that reach, there is a continuity, there is cross-border intelligence and advocacy power. It makes it sound like a spy agency, but a spy agency may be for the good. Sustainable, volunteer, rich organisations, and there is this huge capacity building that continues year upon year, place upon place, and also it listens to the voice of the survivor, and everything is delivered from a trauma-informed with a trauma-informed space and place. So together, Renata and APT are making a local and an international difference. So if I was to come to the end of what I wanted to say today, I was thinking how I would do this because I'm conscious of being the last speaker. This particular Wednesday, or this particular Friday, is the 17th of October. It is the UN Day, the anniversary of the UN Day to end extreme poverty. One way to end human trafficking is to end poverty. So much of the push and pull is based on poverty. If we could end poverty, you wouldn't cure human trafficking, but you could really make a big difference. So I'm wondering whether or not we should go back to SDG 1, no poverty, going back to the Sustainable Development Goals that Kevin mentioned a little bit earlier on, and call for an end to poverty as one way of making sure that perhaps we are making a dent in this scourge, which is human trafficking. I'm also conscious too of the fact that the most recent exhortation of Pope Leo, and it's really his first publication, has spoke that the poor are not simply a societal problem. They are part of our family. They are one of us. And it behoves us to do the very best that we can to reach out, to reach the furthest behind first, which is an aim of the Sustainable Development Goals and would possibly make a real difference, we think, in terms of trying to ensure that the amount of human trafficking and modern slavery is significantly reduced. So I'll leave it there. And thank you indeed for the opportunity to speak today.
So thanks a lot, Brian. Thanks for your passion and knowledge on this field, in this ministry for justice and peace. And you invited us to take one intentional action and to be proactive. And you mentioned that you appreciate all the contributions in this webinar as we appreciate yours. So indeed, we give thanks to all of you, all the speakers. And now we are moving now to a section that is the question and answers. So we are going to have 10 minutes because we are a bit behind in time. Just 10 minutes just to, if any one of you have a particular question to, we have 3 speakers with us now, Kevin, Bishop William, and Brian. Begona has left, and Serge and Elizabeth, they were in video. So if there is any particular question or comment, then you can raise your hand and we give priority to live questions. If not, you can write in the chat. So let us take just 10 minutes in case there is anyone who would like to ask a question. Or you can put a comment in the chat, anything that for you is important to name at this moment.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, Brian, welcome.
On Bishop Kenney's piece at the end. In the last few minutes of Bishop Kenney's piece, he put out a call to action, and there were a number of points. The very first one he said was, be aware. So I'm just wondering that as a call to action, if we were to leave here today with a number of instructions, because very often we tune in and we just go away and we make our tea and have our dinner and we say, well, that was lovely, but what next? We should have homework going away today. And part of the homework should be aware. And the other question should be, where did you buy the jumper? Because that's the question he said. And everything should be the jumper. He said, if a priest bought a jumper and it's cheap, he can clap and be delighted and be warm, but he needs to say, where did the jumper come from? And if enough of us ask, then the shopkeepers will say, well, we need to buy ethically, we need to do it. So they were a number. And then Kevin spoke of the Sustainable Development Goals and of being thinking locally to act globally. So there were a number of lessons and a number of takeaways from today's thing that if we walked away and had them in our head going away and the recording, and maybe the first thing somebody should do is they should say to themselves, when I get the recording, I will share it with somebody and then I'll ask them the hard questions afterwards. I'll ask them a test. And in that way, we'll know they learned it. So to share the recording and to check that they watched it afterwards. So there, I'll stop now.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Thanks again for your enthusiasm and the encouragement to be proactive. Now, there is a question, I think, for you from Pavel on the chat. How many religious congregations are members of Renate or Renate? I don't know how you pronounce that.
Renate, there are up to, we think there are 139, we think. Yeah, there are 36 countries involved, and they are religious sisters primarily, but also priests and brothers, and they are constantly looking for new members. And in some countries, there would be lots of different members. Some countries are very large countries, and they're not just in EU countries. There are in other accessional countries like Albania, Yugoslavia, and other countries like that, often countries of origin. Like Albania, for example, is a country of origin, transit, and destination.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Now we welcome now from Zimbabwe, Elizabeth. Now we have her in person.
Great.
So you can unmute and then let us listen to you, Elizabeth. Yeah, welcome.
Thank you so much. The webinar was very informative, and I'm sure that the takeaways, I'm going also to partake the grace which was in this webinar and also share with other youth ambassadors. I liked the statement which was given by the last presenter, which was saying, for us to end human trafficking, we need to end poverty. This is due to the fact that human trafficking is mainly caused by poverty, and that was so informative. I think all the presenters and all the speakers who were presenting today, and that human trafficking by Kevin Hyland, he mentioned that human trafficking stores the freedom of people. And also you find out that people won't be free. Hence, we need to unite so that we end human trafficking. Thank you very much. I enjoyed.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks for being concise and great to see you live. And there is some appreciations in the chat and also a question from Jean de Dieu. And then he says, I would like to ask the speakers, what do they think should be the role of victims, survivors in the fight against human trafficking? Now, any of the speakers would like to respond to that?
I can start, if that's a help.
Okay, very concise,
There are 6 principles of trauma-enforced practice, and they're in no particular order, but one of them definitely says that you must insist that the voice of the survivor is heard loud and clear, not just because of the experience that they have, but also because of what they can give and the hope that they can create for others when it is their turn to give their testimony. And the power of the testimony, the power of being present, can often be cathartic and hopeful, and can indeed be that way of reaching the furthest behind when it's a case that you have engaged somebody who has been that victim. So it's a powerful voice. It's used by Talitha. It's used in every space that we can possibly imagine. So I think wherever possible, there should be space for the victim or the survivor. They're also instructive when it comes to creating awareness-raising packages, training for or when in the preparation of training for other victims as well, particularly in shelters, like, for example, those that are run by Renata in different countries in Eastern Europe.
Okay, thanks, Brian. There is another question in the chat. Is from there is not the name of the person, but the question is, does the Irish Bishops' Conference have a dedicated office for the care of those who are trafficked or migrant workers?
No.
No, okay,
absolutely not. In actual fact, we have to be quite strategic. We would love for the Irish Bishops' Conference to work much more closely with APT and others as well. And whilst they are concerned with human trafficking, we would love them to be more involved, and we would love to be more involved with them. There are a number of key dates, the 8th of February being one, the 18th of October, and the 31st of July, as in World Trafficking Day. These are key dates that we would like to give Bishops' Conference and everybody to engage.
Okay, thanks a lot, William. Bishop William. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I want to go back to the using of the people who have been trafficked. While I'm totally in agreement with Brian, this should not be taken as a disagreement. We need to be extremely careful. Something which has not been mentioned here today is re-trafficking, where a person is moved out of trafficking, returns home, and is taken again by the traffickers back into it. Therefore, the person has to be very careful that they cannot be identified and people do not know where they are. It's possible to use people and should happen. As I said, I'm in agreement with Brian. Please don't interpret it otherwise. But I think much of it needs to be done by skilled people. I would not, for instance, consider myself sufficiently skilled in this, but you are looking at false identities. You are looking at all sorts of how families welcome people. It's not an easy problem.
Okay, thanks, Bishop William. And then just to check in the chat, there is appreciation from Gerard. I have really enjoyed this webinar, very informative. Also, Paula says, fantastic webinar, super informative. Thanks to all the speakers. Darmut says, great presentations, especially thanks to Elizabeth as a youth ambassador, and to all of you who are devoting your lives to tackling this big challenge. I often wonder about barber shops and washing bays. Okay, thanks a lot to all of you. And then now we are going to move to the last section of our webinar. It's a synopsis of all what we have heard. And from there, we shall give the last word to Michael. So let me just share my screen. So we began in the spirit of Lavigerie. His witness wasn't abstract. He pushed the church from the shoreline into the heart of the problem, insisting that compassion must become concrete action and alliance building, not just words. That faith to action line runs straight through today. That was inspired in the talk and the sharing of Serge. Then also from Zimbabwe, Elizabeth show us the grassroots, youth ambassadors moving through schools, universities, churches, and rural communities, naming local trafficking, not only cross-border, and partnering with government and NGOs to build awareness and protection. It's simple, persistent, relational work, and it saves people. Now from Spain, Sister Begona opened our eyes to a vast but hidden reality, sexual and labor exploitation in apartments, in fields, hotels, and homes. Strong police operations alongside big gaps in identification and long-term support, and a church that shelters, accompanies, and coordinates across more than 50 towns, especially in this jubilee year. Her refrain behind every figure is a face. Kevin Hyland set the global frame. 2 decades of new laws having dismantled traffickers' business model. His takeaway is practical, pull 3 levers that work: early prevention, survivor-led protection, and disciplined partnership, linking church networks with law enforcement, government, and NGOs, the Samata approach. So local action actually moves the dial. Bishop William showed us how those partnerships look in church practice. Build trust across church, police, justice, and civil society. The Santa Marta way: act locally, purchase ethically, and don't forget the spiritual engine that keeps courage alive: prayer with San Bakita and San Joseph as a yearly anchor. And finally, Brian grounded us in Ireland, recent cases, new legal tools for victim referral, persistent gaps, especially in labor, and how networks like APT and Renate add what the state alone cannot. So deep community reach, survivor-centered care, and EU-level advocacy. So this also echoes the chapter 4 of Leo XIV, Dilexi Te, our recent apostolic exhortation. There he says that our work stands in a living tradition from Leo XIII, Rerum Novarum, through Vatican II to today. The Church reads the signs of the times and turns social doctrine into concrete action with a never merely for the poor. Alliances across church, civil society, and institutions are not optional. They are how we confront structures that harm the vulnerable. So, what do we carry out of this webinar? Just 4 proposals: see and stay close. Lavigerie's line was, go where the pain is. Keep proximity to survivors, to frontline sisters and partners, to the hidden places in our towns. And that starts in our parishes, schools, congregations. Also work in alliances. Link your local church efforts with coalitions like Renate, APT, Santa Maria, No Santa Marta, Caritas, and trusted NGOs. Share intelligence, don't duplicate, and act across borders when needed. And this is precisely the history that continues that Leo XIV names in his exhortation. The third point, change the conditions. Push prevention and protection, ethical purchasing, and simply chain scrutiny, parish and school awareness, training for early identification, and systems that put survivors at the center. And finally, keep the heart burning. Our prayer, name Jesus' mission to let the oppressed go free, and invoke Saint Josephine Vaquita. So keep that spiritual center alive, also with Saint Joseph. It is our common ground and our compass. So in short, Lavigerie's fire is not a memory, it is a mandate. And Leo XIV's call in Dilexite confirms it for our time. Love for the Lord is one with love for the poor, expressed in practical joined-up action. So thank you to our speakers for the map, the partnerships, and the next steps. Also to the Missions of Africa and AMRI for convening us, and to all of you for your presence. And let us live with eyes open, hands linked, and hearts steady, so that faith becomes action and action becomes freedom. So, Michael, over to you for the final thanks. Michael?
All right. Thank you very much, Yago. And I think you have thanked everyone on my behalf, but on behalf of the Missionaries of Africa here in Dublin, I'd like to say how happy I was to be able to share with you this moment. As you know, this year we're celebrating the 200th anniversary of the birth of Lavigerie, who has inspired many of us to be missionaries and to work in Africa. And I think this webinar that we had this afternoon was really inspirational. We spent a very rich hour and a half together with fantastic speakers: Father Serge from Nairobi, Elizabeth from Zimbabwe, Sister Begona from Spain, Kevin Hyland from the UK, Bishop William as well from the UK, and Brian O'Toole. And I'd like to thank as well the committee who worked so hard in organizing this event. We began preparing this maybe 4 or 5 months ago. All my Missionary of African confreres, I'm not going to name them individually, but a special word of thanks to Yago, our moderator, who did such a great job in bringing us all together, and to Father Salvador Munoz from the Missionaries of Africa Communications Department in Rome. And all this would not have been possible if we didn't have the collaboration of AMRI, and 2 ladies in particular, Toni Pyke, who has been with us right from the beginning, and Janice Kelly, who joined us a few weeks ago, but whose technical expertise in this endeavor we couldn't have done without. So I'd like to say both to all of you a very, very sincere thank you. And as you just heard, you'll soon be getting the YouTube recording. And Brian O'Toole has said, share the recording. This is what we can do. So thank you very much indeed to all of you for being at this webinar. And I wish you all a very happy evening. And I thank you for your support, your friendship, and for your prayers. Bye-bye.